Picture this. You're walking through a massive palace in Venice in the year 1782. It's carnival season, and the whole city has gone completely crazy. Rich people are throwing the wildest parties you've ever seen. There's music, dancing, and expensive wine flowing like water. People are wearing fancy masks and doing things that would shock normal society. But tonight, you're not at one of those wild parties. You're in a quiet room inside this palace, and something feels really wrong. You've been invited to what the ladies call the secret meeting. It's where the most powerful women in Venice get together to talk about things they can't discuss in public. These aren't just any women. These are duchesses, countesses, and wives of the richest men in Europe. They've seen everything. Nothing shocks them anymore. But tonight is different. They're all standing around a table, staring at something that's making them look absolutely terrified. And when women who are used to scandal look scared, you know it's bad. On the table sits a book. Not just any book. This thing looks evil. It's covered in dark red leather, and even in the candlelight, it seems to give off this creepy energy. The pages inside are filled with careful handwriting. Page after page of notes written in black ink. You can feel the fear in the room. These powerful women who usually gossip and laugh are completely silent. Some of them are crying. Others look like they might throw up. Finally, one of them speaks. Her voice is shaking. "He's really going to do it," she whispers. "He's going to publish everything. Every name. Every detail. Everything he wrote about us." Another woman drops her wine glass. It crashes on the marble floor, but nobody even looks. They're all too shocked by what they just heard. You move closer to get a better look at this mysterious book. In the flickering light, you can see names written inside. Names of women you recognize. Rich ladies, married women, even girls who are barely adults. Each name has a date next to it. And under each name are descriptions that make your stomach turn. This isn't just a book. It's a list. A sick, twisted list of every woman this man has used and abused. And he wrote down everything. Every private moment. Every secret. Every detail that could destroy their lives. And tomorrow, anyone with a few coins can buy it at any bookstore from Venice to Paris. What you're looking at is pure evil disguised as entertainment. Before we dive into this forgotten story of power and abuse, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark chapters of history together from different parts of the world, connected by our shared need to understand how power corrupts. Now, to understand just how shocking this story really is, you need to know what life was like for the super rich in 1700s Europe. This was a world where if you had a title and money, you could basically do whatever you wanted. There were no real laws that applied to aristocrats. No police force that would investigate them. No newspapers that would expose their crimes. The wealthy lived in a completely different reality than everyone else. While common people faced strict moral rules and harsh punishments, the aristocracy operated under their own code. They had private estates, private courts, and private justice systems. If a noble hurt someone, there was almost no way for the victim to get justice. This was especially true when it came to how powerful men treated women. Rich men could seduce, abandon, or abuse women from lower classes with zero consequences. Even women from their own social level had very little protection. Marriage was about money and politics, not love or respect. Society expected women to be pure and modest, but it also expected them to be available for the entertainment of powerful men. It was a rigged game where women couldn't win. If they said no to a powerful man, they faced social destruction. If they said yes, they faced moral condemnation. This system created the perfect environment for predators to operate freely. And some took advantage of this power in ways that were truly evil. The man behind this evil book wasn't born a monster. In fact, Prince Giacomo di Castelmare started life as what everyone called a perfect child. Born in 1745 to one of Venice's oldest and richest families, He had everything going for him. His father was a powerful duke who owned half the city. His mother came from French royalty and was known for her intelligence and beauty. As a little boy, Giacomo was charming and smart. His tutors said he was brilliant, learning languages faster than kids twice his age. He could speak Italian, French, German, and Latin by the time he was 12. He wrote poetry that made adults cry. He played music that filled the palace with beautiful sounds. Everyone who met young Giacomo loved him immediately. He had this natural charm that made people want to be around him. Servants adored him because he was polite and kind. Other noble families competed to have their daughters marry him someday. The church praised him as an example of perfect Christian upbringing. His parents had huge dreams for their son. They planned for him to become a diplomat, maybe even a cardinal. With his intelligence and charm, he could have done anything. He could have made the world a better place. But something started to change when Giacomo hit his teenage years. See, the problem was that nobody ever told him no. When you're that rich and that powerful, and everyone treats you like you're special, it does something to your brain. Giacomo started to believe he really was better than everyone else. He began to think normal rules didn't apply to him. At first, it was small things. He would skip his lessons and nobody punished him. He would be rude to servants and his parents would laugh it off. He started gambling and losing huge amounts of money, but his father would just pay his debts without any consequences. Then came the women. Giacomo discovered that his charm, combined with his wealth and title, made women easy targets. He started with servant girls who couldn't say no to a prince. When he got bored with them, he moved on to merchants' daughters, then wives of lesser nobles. Each conquest made him bolder. Each success convinced him that women existed for his pleasure. He stopped seeing them as real people with feelings and dreams. They became objects to collect, like expensive paintings or rare books. But the worst part was how he started keeping track of everything. At first, it was just mental notes. Then he began writing down names and dates. Soon, he was documenting every detail of every encounter, every private moment, every secret these women shared with him. By the time he turned 25, Prince Giacomo had completely transformed from a promising young man into a calculating predator who saw other human beings as entertainment. And his little hobby of record-keeping was about to become something much more sinister. What made Prince Giacomo so dangerous wasn't just his wealth or title. It was how methodical he became. This wasn't a man driven by passion or emotion. He approached targeting women like a military campaign, studying their weaknesses and planning his attacks with cold precision. He understood that different types of women required different strategies, and he developed specific approaches for each social class. For servant girls and women from poor families, he used what he called the rescue fantasy. He would learn about their problems, sick family members, unpaid debts, dreams of a better life. Then he would appear like a knight in shining armor, offering solutions that seemed too good to be true. Because they were. These women were the most vulnerable because they had no social power to resist a prince. When he offered to pay for a dying mother's medicine or promised to help a family avoid eviction, how could they refuse? He knew they couldn't. That was the point. He would start with small favors that seemed innocent. A job for a brother, medicine for a sick child, new clothes that happened to come with an invitation to dinner. Each favor came with strings attached, creating a web of obligation that became impossible to escape. For married women from noble families, he used a completely different approach. He called this the intellectual seduction. He would target wives who were obviously unhappy in their arranged marriages, women who felt trapped and unappreciated by husbands who saw them as property. Giacomo was genuinely intelligent and charming. He would engage these women in conversations about art, literature, and philosophy, topics their husbands considered unimportant. He made them feel heard and valued for their minds, something many had never experienced. He would write them poetry, send them banned books, engage them in discussions about freedom and independence. For women trapped in loveless marriages, this intellectual attention felt like a lifeline. Only later would they realize it was actually a trap. The most disturbing were his approaches to young women just entering society. These were daughters of wealthy families, usually between 16 and 20, who were being introduced to high society for the first time. They were naive about the ways of the world, excited about their new freedoms, and completely unprepared for someone like Giacomo. He would position himself as a mentor figure, someone who could teach them about art, culture, and society. He had connections to famous artists, writers, and musicians. He could introduce them to experiences their sheltered upbringings had never allowed. These young women saw him as sophisticated and worldly. They trusted him because of his reputation and social standing. Their families encouraged the connection because they saw him as an appropriate suitor from a good family. But the most chilling part of Giacomo's behavior was what he did after each encounter. He didn't just move on and forget. He documented everything. At first, his record-keeping seemed almost innocent. He would write down names, dates, and basic information. But as time went on, his documentation became more detailed and more invasive. He recorded personal information these women had shared in confidence. Details about their families, their fears, their dreams, physical descriptions that violated their privacy. Even conversations they thought were private moments between trusted friends. He treated these women like specimens in a scientific experiment, reducing their humanity to data points in his growing collection. Each entry became more detailed than the last, as if he was trying to capture and own not just their bodies, but their entire beings. What started as a personal hobby was about to become something much more sinister. Because Giacomo had discovered that his documentation wasn't just for his own entertainment. It was a weapon that could be used long after each relationship ended. What Prince Giacomo created wasn't just a diary or journal. It was something far more twisted and evil. He had turned human beings into a catalog, like items in a shop or animals in a zoo. Each woman became nothing more than an entry in his sick collection. The book itself was bound in expensive burgundy leather with gold clasps. He had it specially made by the finest bookbinder in Venice. Inside were hundreds of pages of thick, cream-colored paper. He used the best ink money could buy, writing in perfect handwriting that showed just how much care and attention he put into this disgusting project. Each entry followed the same format, like he was filling out some kind of official document. At the top of each page, he wrote a number. Woman number 1. Woman number 17. Woman number 43. He had literally numbered human beings like items in an inventory. Under the number came the woman's full name, her age, and her social status. But he didn't stop there. He wrote down details about their families, who their parents were, how much money they had, what their fathers did for work. He documented their connections to other people, creating a map of who knew whom in Venice's social circles. Then came the physical descriptions, and this is where his writing became truly disgusting. He described each woman's body in detail that would make you sick: hair color, eye color, height, weight. But he went further, documenting intimate physical details that no one should ever write down about another person. He recorded what they wore during their first meeting, what perfume they used, even how they moved and talked. He noted if they had any scars or birthmarks. He wrote down their habits and mannerisms, like how they laughed or what they did when they were nervous. But the worst part was how he documented their personal secrets. Things these women told him in private moments when they thought they could trust him. Family problems, financial struggles, fears about their futures, secrets about their marriages, their children, their dreams. He wrote down everything they confided in him during what they believed were intimate conversations between people who cared about each other. He turned their trust into ammunition against them. Each entry also included what he called performance notes. This is where he rated and reviewed these women like they were entertainment he had purchased. He gave them scores for different things, comparing them to each other like horses at an auction. He documented dates, locations, and detailed descriptions of every encounter. He wrote down what gifts he gave them, what promises he made, and most disturbingly, how he broke those promises. He seemed to take special pleasure in recording how each relationship ended and how much damage he caused. The most chilling part was his summary section for each woman. Here, he would write his final thoughts about them, often describing them as objects he had owned and used. He reduced complex human beings with hopes, dreams, fears, and families into nothing more than things that had provided him temporary entertainment. This wasn't the work of someone who was out of control or acting on impulse. This was systematic, calculated dehumanization. He had created a written record that turned women into property, relationships into transactions, and human suffering into his personal entertainment. Behind every number in Giacomo's sick book was a real person with a real life that he destroyed. These weren't just names on paper. They were daughters, mothers, wives, and sisters whose lives were torn apart by his cruelty. Let me tell you about some of them. Entry number 7 was Maria Benedetti, a 17-year-old girl who worked as a seamstress for wealthy families. She lived with her sick mother and younger brothers in a tiny apartment near the docks. Maria was known for her beautiful singing voice and her dream of someday opening her own dress shop. Giacomo met her when his family hired her to make clothes for a festival. He noticed her immediately young, innocent, and desperately poor. He used his classic rescue approach, offering to pay for her mother's medicine and help her brothers find work. Maria thought her prayers had been answered. A prince was going to save her family from poverty. She trusted him completely when he invited her to private dinners to discuss business opportunities. She believed him when he said he wanted to help her achieve her dreams. When Giacomo eventually abandoned her, Maria was pregnant and alone. Her reputation was ruined. No respectable family would hire a seamstress who had been involved with a prince. Her brothers lost their jobs. Her sick mother died without medicine because they couldn't afford it anymore. But the worst was yet to come. Years later, when women started whispering about Giacomo's book, Maria discovered that her most private moments, her deepest secrets, and her family struggles were all written down in detail. Everything she had shared in confidence had become entertainment for his personal collection. Entry number 23 was Isabella Morosini, the wife of a wealthy merchant. She was 32, married for 15 years to a man who treated her like furniture. She had 3 children and spent her days managing a household where she felt completely invisible. Giacomo targeted Isabella during one of the city's cultural events. He approached her with discussions about poetry and philosophy, making her feel intelligent and valued for the first time in years. For months, he made her believe she had found her soulmate, someone who understood her mind and appreciated her thoughts. Their affair lasted 2 years. Isabella thought she had found true love. She shared her deepest feelings about her loveless marriage, her fears about her children's futures, and her dreams of a different life. She told him family secrets, financial problems, and personal struggles she had never shared with anyone. When Giacomo got bored and moved on, Isabella was devastated. But the real destruction came later. Her husband somehow learned details about the affair that only she and Giacomo knew. Someone had told him things that Isabella had shared in confidence. Her marriage became a nightmare. Her husband used her secrets against her, threatening to ruin her reputation and take away her children if she didn't obey his every command. She realized that Giacomo had recorded everything and was probably using it to control her even after their relationship ended. Entry number 36 was the most heartbreaking of all. Caterina Grimani was 19, the daughter of a duke, and one of the most eligible young women in Venice. She was intelligent, beautiful, and had everything to live for. Giacomo pursued her as the ultimate prize. She was from his own social level, so he couldn't use poverty or desperation. Instead, he presented himself as a serious suitor, someone her family would approve of for marriage. Caterina fell deeply in love with him. She believed they would marry and build a life together. She shared her hopes, her fears, and her most intimate thoughts with the man she thought would be her husband. When Giacomo suddenly announced his engagement to someone else, Caterina's world collapsed. But the cruelest blow came when she learned that their entire relationship had been recorded in his book like a scientific experiment. Every conversation they had shared, every private moment, every declaration of love had been documented and analyzed. She discovered that he had written detailed notes about her family's finances, her father's political connections, and even her personal habits and physical characteristics. The humiliation was unbearable. Katerina couldn't face the thought that her most private moments were written down somewhere, possibly being shared with others. 6 months after learning about the book, she took her own life. These women represent hundreds of others whose lives were destroyed not once, but twice. First by Giacomo's manipulation and abandonment, and then by the discovery that their trust, their secrets, and their humanity had been turned into entries in his sick collection. For years, Giacomo's sick record book remained his private obsession. The women whose lives he had documented knew something existed, but they had no idea how detailed his records were or what he planned to do with them. They assumed it was just his personal collection, something that would stay locked away in his private chambers forever. They were horribly wrong. By 1782, Giacomo was facing serious financial problems. His gambling debts had spiraled out of control. His family had cut off his allowance after one too many scandals. He owed money to dangerous people who weren't impressed by his royal title. He needed cash fast, and he needed a lot of it. That's when he had the most evil idea of his life. Giacomo realized that his book wasn't just a personal record, it was a potential goldmine. Venice was hungry for scandal. The rich and powerful loved reading about each other's secrets and affairs. If he could find a way to publish his collection without facing legal consequences, he could make a fortune. But money wasn't his only motivation. Giacomo's massive ego couldn't handle being seen as a failure. His gambling losses and financial troubles were making him look weak in front of other nobles. Publishing the book would prove his power and dominance. It would show everyone that he had conquered the most beautiful and powerful women in Venice. He also wanted revenge against the women who had rejected him or caused him problems. Some had tried to expose his behavior to their families. Others had refused his advances or ended relationships on their terms instead of his. Publishing their secrets would destroy them completely while making him rich and famous. Giacomo spent months planning the publication. He couldn't put his real name on it because that would have caused too many legal problems. Instead, he created a fake identity and claimed the book was written by a mysterious gentleman who had since died. He carefully edited the entries to remove some of the most obviously illegal details while keeping all the juicy scandal that would sell books. He changed some names slightly but left enough clues that anyone in Venice society would know exactly who he was writing about. Finding a publisher was easier than expected. Several printing houses were eager to produce what they knew would be a bestseller. The publisher he chose promised to distribute the book not just in Venice, but throughout Italy and France. They planned a massive print run that would reach thousands of readers. When The Gentleman's Private Memoirs hit the bookstores in September 1782, the reaction was explosive. Lines formed outside every bookshop in Venice. People fought each other to get copies. Within hours, the first printing was sold out. The book became the talk of every salon, coffee house, and noble gathering in the city. People read passages aloud at parties. They gossiped about which woman was which number. They shared the most shocking details with friends who hadn't gotten copies yet. For Giacomo, it was everything he had hoped for. He made enough money to pay off his debts and live comfortably for years. He became the most talked about person in Venice. Other men envied his conquests and his boldness in documenting them. But for his victims, publication was the final, devastating blow. Their most private moments were now public entertainment. Strangers were reading about their bodies, their secrets, and their most vulnerable moments. People pointed at them on the street and whispered behind their backs. The book turned their personal trauma into a permanent public record that would exist forever. Their children would someday be able to read about their mothers' private lives. Their grandchildren would inherit this shame as part of their family history. Giacomo had found a way to hurt these women that would last for generations. The publication of The Gentleman's Private Memoirs created the biggest scandal Venice had seen in decades. But what happened next reveals something even more disturbing about 18th century society than the book itself. It shows exactly how the rich and powerful protect their own, even when their crimes are obvious to everyone. Within days of publication, everyone in Venice knew that Prince Giacomo was the real author. His writing style was recognizable to people who knew him. The details were too specific and too accurate to come from anyone else. Several women had already started telling people privately that the prince had been documenting their relationships. You might think this would lead to justice. You might expect that a man who had systematically abused and humiliated dozens of women would face serious consequences. You would be wrong. Instead, Venice's elite rallied around Giacomo. Other noble men openly congratulated him on his literary achievement. They praised his honesty and boldness. Some even asked for advice on how they could document their own conquests. The book became a how-to guide for other predators. The church, which controlled much of Venice's moral authority, remained completely silent. Even though the book described behavior that violated every Christian principle they preached about, they refused to condemn it publicly. Private church officials admitted they found it distasteful, but claimed they couldn't interfere with matters of literature. The legal system was even worse. Several families of the victims tried to bring charges against Giacomo for libel, invasion of privacy, and defamation. Their lawyers were confident they had strong cases, but every single lawsuit mysteriously disappeared before reaching court. Judges who had seemed sympathetic suddenly became unavailable. Court clerks claimed paperwork had been lost. Witnesses changed their stories or refused to testify. It became obvious that powerful people were using their influence to protect Giacomo from any real consequences. Meanwhile, his victims faced a completely different reality. The same society that protected the prince turned on the women he had abused. Instead of sympathy, they received blame and shame. People whispered that they must have encouraged him or asked for it somehow. Married women found their husbands filing for divorce, claiming the book proved their wives were immoral. Single women discovered that no respectable man would consider marrying them now that their private lives were public knowledge. Some were disowned by their families who claimed they had brought shame on the family name. Several prominent writers and intellectuals actually defended the book as an important work of literature. They argued that Giacomo's honest portrayal of human nature was valuable for society. They claimed that readers could learn important lessons about love and relationships from his detailed observations. The famous writer Carlo Goldoni wrote a review calling it a fascinating study of the female character and praising Giacomo's scientific approach to documenting human behavior. Other critics described it as brave and groundbreaking. Not a single major public figure spoke up for the victims. No one questioned whether it was right to publish intimate details about real people without their consent. The entire intellectual and social establishment treated women's suffering as acceptable entertainment. Venice had shown its true values. Protecting powerful men was more important than protecting vulnerable women. If you think Prince Giacomo's story is just ancient history, think again. The same patterns we saw in 1782 Venice are happening right now in 2025. The methods have changed, but the power games are exactly the same. Modern predators still keep detailed records of their victims, just like Giacomo did with his leather-bound book. Instead of writing with ink and quill, they use phones, computers, and cloud storage. They document everything with photos, videos, text messages, and digital files. Look at cases like Jeffrey Epstein, who kept detailed records of everyone who visited his properties and participated in his activities. Investigators found thousands of photos, videos, and documents that he used to control powerful people. Just like Giacomo's book, these records became weapons for blackmail and control. Harvey Weinstein's victims described how he would document their encounters and use that information against them later. Former assistants revealed that he kept detailed files on actresses, including personal information, career vulnerabilities, and private conversations that he could use as leverage. Keith Raniere from the NXIVM cult required members to provide collateral, intimate photos, personal secrets, and detailed confessions that he stored and used to control them. When women tried to leave, he threatened to release their private information, just like how Giacomo's victims lived in fear of their secrets being exposed. Even regular cases of abuse follow these same patterns. Abusive partners today take intimate photos without consent, save private messages, and document personal information they can use as weapons. Social media and smartphones have made it easier than ever to collect and store this kind of material. The power dynamics are identical too. Rich and powerful men still use their money, influence, and social position to target vulnerable women. They still face minimal consequences while their victims are blamed and shamed. Society still tends to protect powerful abusers while abandoning their victims. We see this in how institutions handle modern abuse cases. Universities protect famous professors and athletes. Corporations shield powerful executives. Entertainment industries cover up for profitable stars. The legal system still favors defendants with expensive lawyers and political connections. The historical records from Giacomo's case come from multiple sources that confirm these patterns. The Venetian state archives contain correspondence between families trying to seek justice. Personal diaries from the period describe the social reaction. Church records show the complete silence from religious authorities. Court documents reveal how lawsuits were systematically blocked. Financial records show how Giacomo's family used their wealth to buy protection. Even foreign diplomatic reports mention the scandal and how Venice's elite protected one of their own. What's most disturbing is that nothing fundamental has changed in over 240 years. Technology has evolved, but human nature and power structures remain the same. Predators still document their victims. Society still protects the powerful. And vulnerable people still suffer while justice gets bought and sold. Today, we remember the women whose names were turned into numbers in Prince Giacomo's sick catalog. Maria, the seamstress who dreamed of opening her own shop. Isabella, the merchant's wife who just wanted to feel valued for her mind. Caterina, the young noble who believed in love and paid for it with her life. And dozens of others whose stories were stolen and turned into entertainment. These women were not just victims. They were human beings with hopes, dreams, families, and futures. They deserved to live their lives without being hunted, documented, and destroyed by a predator who saw them as objects for his collection. What Giacomo did wasn't love or romance or even simple cruelty. It was systematic dehumanization disguised as sophistication. He turned intimate relationships into scientific experiments. He transformed trust into a weapon. He made documentation itself a form of ongoing abuse that lasted long after each relationship ended. But Giacomo wasn't the only monster in this story. Venice's entire society enabled his behavior. The legal system that protected him. The church that stayed silent. The intellectuals who praised his literary achievement. The social elite who celebrated his conquests while shaming his victims. This story teaches us critical lessons about power and consent that apply just as much today. Documentation without consent is a violation. Keeping records of intimate encounters is abuse. Using someone's trust and secrets against them is psychological warfare. We live in a world where powerful people still think they can document and control others without consequences, where institutions still protect abusers while abandoning victims, where society still treats women's suffering as entertainment. But we also live in a world where we can choose to do better. We can believe victims when they speak up. We can demand accountability from powerful people. We can refuse to treat abuse as entertainment. We can insist that justice systems actually serve justice. The women in Giacomo's book never got their day in court. They never saw their abuser face real consequences. They died carrying shame that should have belonged to him. But their stories can still serve justice if we learn from them, if we recognize the patterns, if we refuse to let history repeat itself, if we remember that behind every statistic, every scandal, every historical curiosity are real human beings who deserved better. These forgotten women finally deserve to be remembered not as entries in a predator's catalog, but as the human beings they always were. That's the only justice we can give them now, and it's the least we owe them.